At 68, I thought I had done everything for my son. But when his wife filled his head with lies, everything changed. During a brutal Chicago snowstorm, he angrily told me to leave, calling me a useless burden. "Get out," he yelled, and I was left stranded in the freezing cold. But what happened next took him completely by surprise. 3 hours later, when the police called him to tell him something he never expected, he walked into my hospital room and froze. He could not believe what had happened, and neither could I. My name is Hollis, and I am 68 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me with a sickening thud. The metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed louder than the howling wind. I stood on the porch of the upscale suburban house my son lived in, staring at the frosted wood. The temperature was dropping fast, well below freezing, and the Chicago winter was unleashing a Category 3 snowstorm. The wind whipped violently, tearing at the thin fabric of my worn flannel shirt. I did not even have a winter coat. My breath plumed in white clouds in front of me as the snow began to rapidly pile up on my slippers. I was freezing, but the cold biting at my skin was nothing compared to the icy betrayal piercing my chest. I looked through the frosted glass pane of the front door. Inside, the warm yellow light of the hallway flickered. I could see the silhouettes of the two people I had trusted most in this world turning their backs on me and walking away. My own flesh and blood had just locked me out in a deadly blizzard. I stepped off the porch, my knees trembling as my thin soles sank deep into the freezing snow. The streetlights flickered, casting long, lonely shadows across the white pavement. I had absolutely nowhere to go. My phone was dead. My pockets were empty. I was an old black man abandoned in a freezing, wealthy neighborhood where nobody knew me. Just 10 minutes earlier, I had been sitting in the living room playing with my 4-year-old grandson, Leo. We were building a tower out of blocks, laughing and enjoying the warmth of the fireplace. Then the screaming started. Megan, my 32-year-old daughter-in-law, came tearing down the stairs. Her face was red, her eyes wild with a manufactured panic that I had seen far too many times. She was holding an empty velvet jewelry box, pointing her trembling finger directly at me. "It is gone!" she shrieked, her voice piercing the quiet evening. "My $15,000 engagement ring is gone, and I know exactly who took it." Devin rushed into the room looking bewildered. "What are you talking about, Megan?" he asked, trying to calm her down. She shoved the empty box into his chest. "Your father took it, Devin. I left it on my dresser this morning, and he was the only one upstairs. He stole my ring." I stood up slowly, my joints aching as I looked at her in absolute disbelief. "Megan, I have not been upstairs all day," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "I have been down here with little Leo since breakfast," but Megan was not going to let the truth get in the way of her perfectly timed performance. "Do not lie to me," she yelled, stepping closer to me with a look of pure disgust. "I know why you took it. You probably pawned it to pay off your gambling debts." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Gambling debts. I had never gambled a day in my life. It was a vile, racist stereotype she loved to quietly weaponize against me whenever she wanted to undermine my character. She always treated me like a street thug instead of the hardworking man who had raised her husband. I looked at Devin, expecting him to defend me, expecting the boy I had worked 80-hour weeks to put through college to shut down this ridiculous slander. "Devin, you know me," I said, looking my son dead in the eye. "You know I would never steal anything, let alone from my own family. And you know I do not gamble. Tell your wife she is making a mistake." But Devin just stood there looking between his hysterical wife and his elderly father. The silence stretched out, suffocating and heavy. Megan grabbed his arm, crying fake tears that completely shattered his weak resolve. "Devin, look at him," she sobbed, playing the victim perfectly. "He is broke. He lives off our charity. He has no money and no future. Who else would take it? I cannot live like this anymore, Devin. It is him or me. I am terrified to even leave my valuables in my own house." The betrayal I saw forming in my son's eyes was worse than any weapon. He was calculating the cost of peace in his marriage and realizing that throwing his father under the bus was the cheapest option available. He swallowed hard, his posture shifting as he aligned himself entirely with her lies. "Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a cold, authoritative tone that he usually reserved for his subordinates at the sales firm. "Just give the ring back. Give it back right now, and we will not call the police. I stared at him, my heart breaking into a million irreparable pieces. "You actually believe her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You actually believe I am a thief?" "I do not want to hear your excuses anymore," Devin shouted, stepping toward me aggressively. "I am sick of this. I am sick of the drama. I am sick of supporting you. You have been nothing but a useless burden since you moved in here. A useless burden." The words echoed in my head. He had no idea the sacrifices I had made. He had no idea the truth about my finances or the trust fund I had secretly set up for him and Leo. He only saw the worn-out clothes I wore and the humble persona I maintained to test his character, and he had just failed that test spectacularly. "I am your father, Devin," I said, standing as tall as my 68-year-old frame would allow. "I raised you to be a man of honor. Do not do this." But he was completely blinded by his wife's toxic influence. "You are not a father." He spat his face, contorting with anger. "You are a leech. You come into my beautiful home, you eat my food, and then you steal from my wife. Get out." He grabbed me by the arm, his grip bruising my skin, and shoved me toward the front hallway. Megan stood in the background holding little Leo back as the boy started to cry, seeing his grandfather being treated like a criminal. Papa Leo cried out, reaching for me. "Shut up," Leo, Megan snapped, pulling the child away and glaring at me with a triumphant smirk. Devin did not even give me a chance to grab my coat or my phone from the kitchen counter. He pushed me out onto the freezing porch. "Get out and do not ever come back," he yelled, his voice carrying over the howling wind. Now I was out here walking aimlessly through a merciless Chicago blizzard. The snow was falling so thick and fast I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. My flannel shirt was completely soaked through, chilling me to the bone. My hands and feet had already gone numb, losing all sensation as the frostbite began to aggressively set in. Every step felt like lifting a boulder. The wind roared in my ears, drowning out my own ragged breathing. I stumbled my frozen slippers, slipping on a patch of black ice. I crashed hard onto the frozen concrete, the impact sending a shockwave of pain through my fragile ribs. I tried to push myself up, but my arms simply gave out. The cold was overwhelming, shutting down my systems one by one. My vision blurred as the white snow quickly swallowed me whole. I laid my head against the icy pavement, my consciousness rapidly fading into absolute darkness. Just as my eyes fluttered shut, a faint sound pierced through the howling storm. The loud, urgent wail of an approaching ambulance siren. 3 hours later, the shrill ringing of a cell phone shattered the dead silence of the master bedroom. The digital clock on the nightstand glared a harsh neon red, reading 3:12 in the morning. Outside, the blizzard was still raging, whipping violent sheets of snow against the reinforced glass windows. Devin groaned, rubbing his heavy eyes as he blindly reached over Megan to grab the vibrating phone. He squinted at the unknown caller ID before answering with a raspy, irritated voice. "Yes, who is this?" On the other end, a sterile and urgent voice responded. "Is this Devin? I am calling from Central General Hospital. We have an emergency. We brought in an elderly African-American male matching the description of a Hollis found near your residential area. He was discovered collapsed on the sidewalk during the blizzard. He is suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite. We need you to come down immediately for identification and to assume responsibility." Devin sat bolt upright, the heavy duvet falling off his chest. The remnants of sleep instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden jolt of panic. He swallowed hard, his throat completely dry. "Is he alive?" Devin managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The voice on the phone remained professional but grim. "He is currently stabilized, but his condition is critical. We need next of kin present right now. Please hurry." Devin hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly in the dark. He turned on the bedside lamp, the sudden light making Megan groan and pull the covers over her head. "What is it?" she mumbled, clearly annoyed at the interruption of her sleep. "It is the hospital," Devin said, his voice tight with a mixture of guilt and dread. "They found my father in the snow." The drive to Central General Hospital was treacherous. The blizzard had reduced visibility to almost nothing, and the tires of Devin's luxury SUV slipped against the thick layers of black ice. The heater was blasting, but the atmosphere inside the vehicle was freezing cold. Megan sat in the passenger seat, her arms crossed tightly over her expensive cashmere coat. Her face was twisted into a scowl of pure resentment. She did not look like a woman whose father-in-law had just nearly frozen to death. She looked like someone who had been inconvenienced by a delayed flight. "I cannot believe we are doing this at 3 in the morning, Megan complained bitterly, staring out the frosted window. "This is exactly what I was talking about, Devin. He is nothing but drama. He probably wandered off on purpose just to make us feel guilty. Do not be ridiculous, Megan. Devin snapped his hands, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He almost died out there. We kicked him out in a Category 3 storm with no coat. But Megan was not about to let him feel any genuine remorse. She uncrossed her arms and turned to face him, her tone dripping with toxic condescension. Oh, please, Devin. Stop acting like he is a helpless victim. You know exactly how people like him operate. People like him? Devin asked, glancing at her sharply. What does that mean? Megan rolled her eyes, leaning closer to him to drive her point home. You know what it means. He is a hustler, Devin. He has been broke his whole life. He probably went to some sketchy bar down the street, got completely drunk, and passed out in a snowbank. It is typical behavior for people from his background. You cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. Devin felt a sharp pang of guilt deep in his chest, a fleeting reminder of the man who had worked multiple jobs to buy him his first car, the man who had sacrificed everything to put him through business school. But that guilt was quickly suffocated under Megan's relentless psychological conditioning. She knew exactly which buttons to push to make him feel superior, using microaggressions to sever the bond between father and son. You work too hard to deal with this street-level nonsense. She continued, her voice softening into a fake, soothing rhythm. You are a successful executive. You have a beautiful home, a beautiful family. You cannot let him drag you back down to the gutter. He stole my ring, Devin. He was trying to pawn it for quick cash. You did the absolute right thing by kicking him out. You protected your family from a thief. Devin exhaled heavily, the tension in his shoulders slightly releasing as he allowed his wife's venomous lies to validate his horrific actions. He needed to believe her. If he did not believe her, he would have to face the monstrous reality that he had sentenced his own father to death over a piece of jewelry. You are right, Devin muttered, his eyes fixed on the snowy road ahead. I cannot let him ruin what we have built. We will just go and sign whatever liability release forms they have and be done with it. I am not paying his medical bills either. The state can handle it. Megan smirked in the darkness, satisfied that her manipulation had worked perfectly. Exactly. We will drop him off at some state-funded care facility as soon as he is discharged. We are done playing the charity case. They drove the rest of the way in silence, completely convinced of their own twisted righteousness. They thought they were heading into a run-down emergency room to discard a broken old man. They had absolutely no idea they were driving straight into a devastating trap. They pulled into the emergency parking lot of Central General Hospital, the bright red emergency signs cutting through the blinding snow. Devin and Megan rushed through the automatic sliding doors, fully expecting the chaotic, overcrowded, and sterile environment of a public emergency room. They braced themselves for the smell of bleach, the sound of wailing patients, and the sight of Hollis lying on a stained gurney in a crowded hallway. Devin marched up to the front desk, his corporate arrogance fully intact. I am Devin. You called me about a Hollis. The triage nurse looked up, her expression immediately shifting from tired to highly alert the second she heard the name. Yes, sir. Please follow me right this way. She stepped out from behind the counter. Devin and Megan followed, expecting to be led down a dingy corridor toward the basement or a ward full of indigent patients. But the nurse did not walk toward the general emergency wing. Instead, she bypassed the bustling trauma center entirely and led them toward a restricted section at the back of the lobby. She approached a set of heavy mahogany doors and swiped a specialized keycard. The doors slid open silently, revealing a private elevator lined with polished brass and mirrors. Sir, the nurse said respectfully, stepping aside. He is up in the penthouse recovery suite. The doors will open directly onto his floor. Devin frowned in utter confusion. The penthouse suite. There must be some mistake. You have the wrong person. My father does not have insurance for a private suite. Megan immediately panicked, grabbing Devin's arm. We are not paying for this, Devin. Tell them right now we are not covering any VIP charges. The nurse offered a polite but incredibly tight smile. There is no mistake, Mom. All expenses have already been fully covered by his personal trust. Please proceed. The elevator ascended smoothly, leaving the noise of the emergency room far below. When the doors finally chimed and parted, Devin and Megan stepped out into a sprawling, immaculate lobby featuring imported marble floors, modern art, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snowy city skyline. It looked like a five-star luxury hotel, not a hospital. They cautiously walked toward the double doors of the main suite. Devon pushed the door open, bracing himself to see a broken, freezing old man on life support. Instead, his jaw dropped and he froze completely in his tracks. Hollis was not in a hospital bed. He was sitting comfortably on a plush leather sofa wearing a dark silk robe, calmly sipping a steaming cup of coffee. He looked perfectly composed and utterly powerful. But that was not what made Devon's blood run ice cold. Standing firmly to the right of Hollis was a man in a sharp, tailored suit clutching a leather briefcase. To his left stood the city chief of police in full uniform, arms crossed, staring directly at Megan with a piercing, unforgiving glare. Devon stood completely paralyzed in the doorway of the hospital penthouse suite, his mind violently rejecting the reality unfolding before his eyes. The transition from the sterile, chaotic emergency room downstairs to this opulent, climate-controlled sanctuary was jarring enough. The air up here hummed silently, laced with the rich, earthy aroma of freshly brewed artisanal coffee rather than the sharp scent of medical bleach. Devon's eyes darted wildly around the expansive room, taking in the gleaming mahogany wall panels, the expensive abstract art, and the sprawling, snow-covered city views visible through the massive, frost-rimmed windows. But absolutely nothing scrambled his reality more profoundly than the sight of his father. Hollis was not hooked up to a screeching ventilator. He was not shivering uncontrollably under thin, cheap hospital blankets fighting for his final breaths. Instead, he was sitting with perfect, unbothered posture on a tufted leather sofa, wearing a dark, luxurious silk robe that draped elegantly over his broad shoulders. He held a delicate porcelain cup with a remarkably steady hand, taking a slow, deliberate sip before lowering it to the glass coffee table in front of him. There was zero trace of the broken, humble man Devon had shoved onto the freezing concrete porch just hours ago. Instead, Hollis exuded an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. The transformation was so profound that Devon physically took a step back, bumping into Megan, who was equally frozen in her tracks. She stared at the elderly black man she had relentlessly mocked and belittled, her mouth opening and closing in silent shock. The two men standing firmly beside Hollis did not look at him with the pity one reserves for a homeless victim. The sharply dressed man with the leather briefcase radiated lethal legal professionalism, while the fully uniformed chief of police stood like a loyal guard flanking a five-star general. Devon swallowed the massive, suffocating lump in his throat, his voice cracking as he finally managed to speak. "Dad, what is going on here? How are you paying for this?" Hollis did not answer his son. He simply picked up his coffee cup again, letting the dead silence stretch out and suffocate the two people standing nervously by the door. It was the police chief who finally broke the heavy, oppressive tension, stepping forward with a stern, uncompromising expression that promised severe consequences. His heavy boots clicked sharply against the imported marble floor as he approached Megan, his arms uncrossing to reveal a thick manila folder. Mrs. Megan, the chief said, his voice echoing with undeniable official weight. "Earlier this evening, your husband placed a frantic call to our precinct to report a stolen engagement ring valued at $15,000. You explicitly accused this man, Mr. Hollis, of taking the jewelry to pay off gambling debts. You stated he was the only one in the house and that you feared for your safety. Is that correct?" Megan stiffened, her pale skin turning a blotchy, panicked red. She glanced frantically at Devon, hoping he would step in to shield her, then looked back at the chief. Her usual entitlement and arrogance faltered heavily under the intense, unforgiving scrutiny of top-tier law enforcement. "Yes," she stammered, crossing her arms defensively over her cashmere coat. "That is correct. I left it on my dresser and he took it. He is a thief. I know what kind of people do these things." The chief did not blink at her thinly veiled prejudice. He slowly opened the manila folder and pulled out a stack of high-resolution, full-color photographs. He tossed them onto the glass coffee table right next to Hollis and his porcelain cup, where they landed with a sharp smack. "That is a very interesting accusation, ma'am," the chief continued, his tone dripping with professional disdain. "Because an hour after your husband reported the theft, my detectives decided to run a routine check on all local pawn shops in the downtown district. It is standard operating procedure when high-value jewelry goes missing in affluent neighborhoods. We pulled the security footage from a shop called Gold Exchange located exactly 3 miles from your residence. I highly suggest you look at those photos very closely." Devon, his heart hammering violently against his ribs, stepped forward and looked down at the table. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and sick. The glossy photographs were crystal clear, captured in pristine 4K resolution. They showed a white woman with blonde hair standing right at the pawnshop counter. She was wearing the exact same designer cashmere coat Megan was currently wearing. In the next photo, the woman was sliding a familiar velvet box across the illuminated glass counter. In the final, most damning photo, she was eagerly stuffing a thick stack of $100 bills into her expensive purse. It was Megan. There was absolutely zero room for doubt. The bright digital timestamp on the security footage read Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, exactly 3 days ago. 3 entire days before she threw her hysterical crying fit in their living room. "You did not lose your ring today," the chief stated, his voice booming through the quiet suite. "You pawned it yourself 3 days ago for $4,000 in cash. You then intentionally filed a false police report and maliciously accused an innocent elderly man of grand larceny, a felony charge that would carry serious prison time. You used his race and baseless, disgusting stereotypes about gambling to manipulate your husband into throwing his own father out into a deadly Category 3 snowstorm. That is not just filing a false report, ma'am. That is reckless endangerment. It is a miracle this man is not dead in a morgue right now." The metaphorical slap across Megan's face was so violent it left her physically trembling. Her entire narrative, carefully constructed to isolate Devon and villainize his father, had just been incinerated in front of the highest-ranking police officer in the city. She had weaponized her tears, fully expecting everyone to blindly believe the crying white woman over the older black man. But she had miscalculated entirely. She had unknowingly messed with a man who had the city authorities standing at attention by his side. "That is a lie," Megan shrieked, taking a panicked step backward toward the elevator. Her voice cracked, soaring to an unbearable shrill pitch as she frantically pointed at the photos on the table. "That is not me. Someone must have stolen my coat. Someone stole my identity. This is a setup. You cannot prove anything." Her denial was so utterly pathetic, so desperately transparent, that even the police chief let out a low scoff of disgust. "We have the pawn receipt with your signature on it, ma'am," the chief countered flawlessly. "And the pawnshop owner identified you from a photo lineup 20 minutes ago. You are on multiple cameras from multiple angles. You left a financial paper trail a mile long. Your lies are over. Stop insulting our intelligence." Devon felt his knees completely buckle. He staggered, catching himself heavily against the back of a leather armchair to keep from hitting the floor. His breathing became shallow and rapid as the horrifying reality of what he had done crashed down on him with the force of a collapsing building. He turned his head slowly, looking at his wife as if he were staring at a terrifying, unrecognizable monster. "You pawned it," Devon whispered, his voice trembling with a volatile mixture of profound shock and rising fury. "You pawned the ring I bought you, and then you looked me right in the eye, you cried fake tears, and you told me my father stole it. You made me throw the man who raised me into a blizzard." Megan reached out for him, her fake tears flowing once again, desperate to regain control of her crumbling narrative. "Devon, baby, listen to me. I had to do it. I needed the money for my credit cards. You do not understand the pressure I am under to keep up our lifestyle. Do not look at me like that." But Devon pulled his arm away violently, physically sickened by her touch. He had sentenced his father to freeze to death on the pavement, completely abandoning the man who had sacrificed everything for him, all because he chose to believe her racist, toxic manipulation. The guilt felt like a physical weight crushing his chest, suffocating him from the inside out. He had failed the ultimate test of loyalty. Hollis finally moved. He set his coffee cup down, leaned forward, and steepled his fingers, looking at his son with eyes as cold and unforgiving as the storm raging outside the windows. "You failed, Devon." Hollis said, his voice carrying the deep, resonant authority of a man who had commanded global boardrooms for decades. "I spent my entire life teaching you how to be a man of integrity, how to protect your blood, and how to see through the lies of people who smile in your face while holding a knife to your back. But you let her turn you against me in 5 minutes. The man in the sharp suit stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase with a crisp, authoritative snap. He pulled out a thick, legally binding document and tossed it onto the glass table, landing it squarely on top of the pawnshop photographs. "Since the police are already here to document this lovely family reunion," Hollis continued smoothly, his intense gaze shifting directly to a terrified Megan, "I have a little something for you, too. This is a formal 30-day eviction notice. The game has officially begun." Devon stared at the thick, legally binding document resting on the glass table. The bold letters spelling out eviction notice seemed to mock him, burning into his retinas. The sheer absurdity of the situation finally snapped the last thread of his composure. The guilt that had been choking him just moments ago instantly evaporated, replaced by a defensive, explosive rage. He lunged forward, snatching the document from the table with trembling hands. "You must be out of your mind," Devon yelled, his voice echoing off the marble walls of the penthouse suite. He gripped the edges of the heavy paper and ripped it violently in half, then again throwing the shredded pieces onto the floor. "You cannot evict me from my own house. I am the homeowner. My name is on the lease. I pay the mortgage every single month. I worked for that house. I built that life. You have absolutely no right to sit here in your silk robe and hand me an eviction notice. You have nothing. You are a retired warehouse worker who lives in my guest room. I pay $1,500 a month to the property management firm, not to you. You do not own the walls, you do not own the roof, and you certainly do not own me." Devon was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he pointed an accusing finger at the lawyer. "And you, whoever you are participating in a scam. My father has no money to hire a corporate attorney. He is completely delusional." Hollis did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply watched the torn pieces of paper flutter to the floor like the snow he had been left to die in. When Devon finally stopped shouting, the silence in the room was absolute. Bradley, the lawyer, calmly reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a second identical copy of the eviction notice, placing it gently on the table, exactly where the first one had been. "You can tear up as many copies as you like," Devon Hollis said, his voice smooth, resonant, and entirely stripped of any paternal warmth. "It will not change the legal reality of your situation. You see, you have spent the last 8 years believing you are a self-made man. You walk around in your tailored suits, looking down your nose at people who work with their hands, people like me. You let your wife fill your head with garbage about my background, completely forgetting where you came from. But you forgot one crucial detail. I am the man who built a nationwide logistics empire from a single delivery truck." Bradley opened a thick dossier, sliding a series of financial records and property deeds across the table. Hollis leaned forward, his eyes locking onto his son. 5 years before you graduated college, I quietly sold my logistics firm to a private equity group for more money than you will see in 10 lifetimes. I placed the assets into a blind trust because I knew that if you found out I was wealthy, it would ruin you. As a black man in this country, I knew you had to work 10 times harder just to get a seat at the table. I wanted you to have that hunger, that drive. I wanted you to build your own legacy. But you became arrogant. You became entitled. And you became foolish. Hollis pointed a steady finger at the property deeds resting on the table. You just proudly claim that you pay $1,500 a month for that beautiful, sprawling suburban home. Do you honestly believe a 5-bedroom estate in that zip code costs $1,500 a month? Did your corporate business degree fail to teach you basic real estate economics? Devon stared at the documents, his heart skipping a beat. The actual mortgage on that property is $6,000 a month, Hollis stated, dropping the numbers like heavy stones. I am the primary shareholder of the property management company you send your little check to. For 8 years, I have subsidized the remaining $4,500 every single month. I paid the property taxes. I paid the maintenance fees. I paid for the roof over your head and the luxury lifestyle your wife so desperately needs to feel superior to everyone else. You called me a useless burden. You told me I was living off your charity. The truth is, Devon, you have been living off my charity since the day you signed that lease. I sat in your guest room eating the meals you begrudgingly served me, wearing the old clothes I kept, just to see what kind of man you had become when you thought you were the one holding all the power. I watched you let your wife disrespect me daily. I watched you treat my presence like a stain on your perfect affluent life, and tonight you showed me your true colors. You do not own that house, Devon. You are a heavily subsidized tenant, and as the legal owner of that property, I am formally terminating your month-to-month lease. You have 30 days to pack your things and vacate my property. I am cutting you off, every single cent. The devastating reality of the numbers hit Devon like a freight train. The color drained from his face, leaving an ashen, horrified expression. He stared blindly at the financial documents spread across the glass table. $6,000 a month. The math aggressively echoed in his mind, shattering his fragile ego into dust. He made a good salary as a sales director, but he was drowning in car payments, credit card debt, and country club fees just to keep up appearances. He did not have an extra $4,500 lying around. He did not have any savings. His entire identity, his pride, his corporate success, It was all an elaborate illusion funded by the very man he had just dragged out into a lethal blizzard. Devon felt his knees buckle. His breathing turned shallow and panicked. He looked at the torn shreds of paper on the floor, realizing they were not fake documents. They were his financial death warrant. Without that house, without that massive subsidy, he was functionally broke. He was going to be out on the street. The crushing realization that he had thrown away a fortune and, more importantly, a father who had silently supported him for nearly a decade was suffocating. He looked at Hollis, his eyes wide with a sudden desperate terror. "Dad, wait." Devon stammered, his voice completely losing its previous arrogant edge. "You cannot do this. We will have nowhere to go. I cannot afford that kind of rent. Please, we can talk about this. I made a mistake. I was angry. I was just listening to Megan." He was begging now, completely stripped of his pride, practically pleading with the man he had called a leech just hours ago. Megan's silence, since the police chief humiliated her, suddenly snapped back to life. The realization of Hollis's massive wealth overrode her embarrassment. Her eyes darted from the legal documents to Hollis, calculating her next move. Instead of showing remorse, a vicious determination hardened her features. She grabbed Devon's arm tightly, yanking him back. "Stop begging him, Devon." Megan hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "The cold has clearly damaged his brain. He is completely delusional. He is an old man making erratic, dangerous financial decisions. We are not leaving our home." She glared fiercely at Hollis and the lawyer. "I am calling my lawyers first thing in the morning. We will file for a conservatorship and have the courts strip you of your control. You are legally incompetent, old man. By the time we are done, we will control every asset you have." She pulled Devon toward the elevator, dragging her disgraced husband out of the penthouse. The doors slid shut, leaving their hollow threats lingering in the quiet air. The morning after the confrontation in the penthouse suite, the brutal reality of my retaliation began to set in for Devon and Megan. But instead of showing an ounce of remorse, Megan chose to strike where she knew it would inflict the most agonizing pain possible. My grandson Leo. I had sent a simple, straightforward text message to Devon requesting that my driver pick up Leo for our usual Sunday afternoon visit to the park. The response I received was not from my son. It was a viciously typed paragraph directly from Megan. "You are never seeing my son again," the message read. "You are a delusional, dangerous old man. The freezing cold out in that storm clearly damaged whatever was left of your brain. You are completely unstable, and I will not allow a deranged, vindictive stranger anywhere near my child. If you try to contact us or send anyone to our property, I will call the police and file an immediate restraining order. Do not test me." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the sheer calculated cruelty of her words washing over me. She was using a 4-year-old innocent boy as a human shield and a bargaining chip. She knew Leo was my absolute weak spot, the only reason I had silently endured her toxic prejudice presence for so many years. Megan was betting that the threat of losing my grandson would force me to panic back down, rip up the eviction notice, and hand over the keys to my wealth. She was severely underestimating the kind of war she had just initiated. 2 days later, the full scope of her malicious strategy was laid bare on the polished mahogany desk in front of me. I was sitting in the secure conference room of my legal team when Bradley, my lead attorney, walked in with a thick stack of court filings. His expression was a volatile mixture of professional disbelief and deep-seated anger. He dropped the heavy folders onto the desk with a loud slap. Hollis Bradley began, his tone deadly serious. "Your daughter-in-law was not making empty threats in that hospital suite. She and Devon have formally filed a petition in family court to establish a full legal conservatorship over you and your entire estate." I leaned forward, my hands resting calmly on the leather armrests of my chair. "A conservatorship," I repeated, letting the heavy word hang in the quiet room. "On what grounds exactly?" Bradley opened the first folder, shaking his head in disgust. "They are claiming that you are suffering from severe undiagnosed dementia, which they violently argue was drastically exacerbated by your prolonged exposure to the Category 3 blizzard. Megan has submitted a sworn affidavit stating that your sudden decision to evict them and cut off their financial support is clear evidence of irrational, erratic behavior caused by rapid cognitive decline. They are painting your financial independence and your eviction notice as terrifying symptoms of a deteriorating mind rather than a rational business decision." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. So suddenly stopping the funding of their lavish fake lifestyle makes me clinically insane. What is Devon's role in this betrayal? Bradley flipped to the next page, his jaw tightening. Devon is listed as the primary petitioner. He is asking the judge to grant him immediate emergency control over all your medical decisions and, more importantly, total, unrestricted access to your financial assets. He claims he needs to step in to protect you from yourself and from predatory lawyers who are allegedly taking advantage of your confused state. They even attached a letter from a private doctor who has never once examined you. A physician widely known for writing favorable reports for a high price, stating that extreme cold trauma can cause sudden onset paranoia and aggressive financial paranoia in the elderly. The sheer audacity of their plan was breathtaking. Devin was facing complete financial ruin. He knew he could not afford the $6,000 a month mortgage. He knew his luxury cars would be repossessed and his elite country club memberships revoked within weeks. Instead of acting like a man and finding a legitimate way to support his own family, he had decided to team up with his manipulative wife to legally declare his own father mentally incompetent. They wanted to lock me away in a care facility, drug me into submission, and drain the massive trust fund I had spent my entire life building from the ground up. They thought they could use the legal system to hijack my fortune, while successfully posing as concerned, loving family members rescuing a sick old man. It was the ultimate betrayal wrapped in a suffocating layer of bureaucratic deceit. They were not just trying to steal my money, they were trying to completely erase my basic human rights, my freedom, and my dignity. Bradley leaned across the desk, his eyes sharp and focused, ready to launch a massive legal counteroffensive. "Hollis, this is a highly aggressive and incredibly dangerous legal maneuver," he warned, tapping his pen aggressively against the fraudulent court documents. "We cannot afford to treat this lightly or underestimate their desperation for cash. Family courts often err on the side of caution when emergency medical claims are made by immediate family members. If a judge grants a temporary conservatorship even for a few days pending a full hearing, Devin and Megan will gain immediate legal access to your accounts. They will drain whatever liquid assets they can reach, transfer funds offshore, and create a massive financial nightmare before we can successfully reverse the ruling." "What is our countermove?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the inferno of rage boiling inside my chest. "We crush this petition right now before it ever sees the inside of a courtroom," Bradley stated firmly. "I want you to immediately authorize the release of your complete, unredacted medical records. You just had a comprehensive physical and cognitive evaluation 3 months ago that conclusively proves your mental acuity is in the top percentile for your age group. I also want to schedule a new independent psychiatric evaluation this afternoon with a court-approved specialist to confirm you have suffered zero neurological damage from the freezing temperatures. We will file an emergency motion to dismiss the ironclad medical evidence and publicly expose their petition as a blatant, malicious cash grab. The judge will throw the case out instantly, and we can immediately countersue for frivolous litigation and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Bradley wanted to build an impenetrable fortress of truth to protect me. But he did not understand that I was no longer interested in simply defending myself from my son's attacks. I looked at the thick stack of papers, a slow, highly calculated smile spreading across my face. "No, Bradley," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling absolute calmness. "We are not releasing a single medical record. We are not scheduling any psychiatric evaluations today. We are going to let them proceed." Bradley stared at me, completely bewildered by my command. "Hollis, that is an incredibly massive risk. If we do not fight this immediately, they will honestly think they are winning." "Exactly," I replied, leaning back comfortably in my leather chair. "Let them believe they are winning. Let them believe I am genuinely losing my mind. Desperate, greedy people make careless, fatal mistakes when they think the victory is already securely in their hands. Tomorrow morning, I am going to return to that house to pack up my remaining personal belongings. And when I walk through that front door, I am going to give them the exact, confused, trembling, broken old man they so desperately want to see. I am going to turn my old bedroom into a trap, and we are going to watch them happily walk right into it." The next morning, the sky over Chicago was a bleak and unrelenting gray, perfectly matching the atmosphere inside the sprawling suburban estate. I arrived at the property not in the sleek, heavily tinted black town car my trust normally provided, but in the back of a battered, rusted yellow taxi. I stepped out onto the frozen driveway, my posture deliberately hunched, my shoulders slumped heavily under the weight of an oversized, mismatched wool coat. I forced my hands to tremble violently as I fumbled with my set of house keys, scratching the metal uselessly against the front door lock for several minutes. Inside the foyer, I could see the shadows of Devin and Megan moving through the hallway, watching my pathetic struggle through the frosted glass. When Devin finally swung the door open, his face was a mask of sheer contempt mixed with triumphant arrogance. I did not look him in the eye. Instead, I shuffled past him, my gaze wandering aimlessly around the grand entryway as if I had never seen it before. I muttered under my breath about the freezing wind and asked where they had put my winter boots, acting as if the explosive, life-altering confrontation in the hospital penthouse had never even occurred. Megan stood near the base of the grand staircase, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching my performance with a predatory, highly satisfied smirk. To them, my act was absolute confirmation. They genuinely believed the freezing blizzard had irreparably shattered my mind. I slowly made my way up the carpeted stairs to my old guest room, dragging my feet heavily, perfectly playing the role of the broken, delusional old man they desperately needed me to be. Once inside my room, I began pulling empty cardboard boxes from the closet, moving with agonizing slowness. I packed a few old flannel shirts, purposely putting them in the wrong boxes, leaving a chaotic, nonsensical mess on the floor to further sell my cognitive decline. After about 20 minutes of creating this deliberate disaster, I shuffled out of the room and headed downstairs to the kitchen, leaving my bedroom door cracked open, just enough to be an irresistible invitation. I knew Megan was waiting for an opening. From my position at the kitchen counter downstairs, I listened closely to the soft, calculated creak of the floorboards above me. Upstairs, Megan slipped quietly into my bedroom like a thief in broad daylight. Her eyes darted around the messy space, her lips curling in deep disgust at the scattered clothes and overturned boxes. But she was not there to inspect my packing skills. She moved swiftly and purposefully straight toward my wooden nightstand. In her pocket, she carried a small plastic bag filled with heavy prescription-grade sedatives she had illicitly acquired from a shady connection. Her plan was brutally simple and completely illegal. She intended to swap my daily blood pressure medication and standard vitamin supplements with these powerful tranquilizers. When the court-mandated psychiatric evaluation finally took place, I would show up heavily medicated, slurring my words, drooling, and entirely unable to string a coherent sentence together. It was a guaranteed way to medically validate their conservatorship petition and lock me away in a secure facility. She quickly opened my plastic daily pill organizer, her manicured fingers deftly replacing the harmless vitamins with the heavy, mind-altering sedatives. But as she reached across the nightstand to place the organizer back in its exact spot, the flowing sleeve of her expensive cashmere sweater caught the edge of a thick leather binder resting near my reading lamp. The binder fell to the hardwood floor with a heavy thud, bursting open and scattering a stack of pristine, legal-sized papers across the carpet. Annoyed Megan dropped to her knees to gather the documents before I could return. As she scooped up the papers, the bold capitalized heading on the topmost document caught her eye. It read, "Last Will and Testament of Hollis Draft Copy." Her breath hitched sharply in her throat. Her hands, previously steady while committing severe medical tampering, now trembled with a sudden, insatiable curiosity. She sat back on her heels and began reading the dense legal jargon. As her eyes scanned down to the asset distribution and beneficiary section, the blood completely drained from her face. The document explicitly stated that 100% of my massive multi-million-dollar trust fund, including the property management company that owned the very house she was standing in, was to be entirely liquidated upon my death. The staggering financial proceeds were legally mandated to be divided equally among 5 different African-American educational charities and a series of local, underprivileged community centers. Devin was listed by name, followed by an aggressive, legally binding clause explicitly disinheriting him and his spouse from receiving a single cent of my fortune. Leo was allocated a small, heavily restricted educational fund that Megan would never be allowed to access or manage. A suffocating wave of panic and raw, unadulterated greed washed over Megan. She realized instantly that even if she and Devin successfully won the conservatorship battle and gained temporary control of my finances, this airtight will would completely destroy their long-term future. If I died, the conservatorship would immediately dissolve, the will would activate, and she would be left with absolutely nothing. Her lavish lifestyle, her country club status, her luxury cars, everything would vanish into charity. But as she stared in horror at the final page of the document, a sinister realization dawned on her. The signature line at the bottom of the page was completely blank. It was merely a finalized draft waiting for my pen. Beside the scattered documents, a yellow legal pad lay open on the floor. On it, I had intentionally scrawled my own signature over and over again, deliberately making the handwriting look shaky, weak, and inconsistent, exactly like the writing of a man suffering from severe neurological decline. Megan looked from the blank signature line on the will to the shaky practice signatures on the legal pad. A dark, opportunistic grin spread across her face, replacing her previous panic with pure malice. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a sleek black ink pen. She knew that if she could perfectly mimic my deteriorating handwriting, she could easily forge a completely new signature page, one that named her and Devin as the sole uncontested beneficiaries of my entire financial empire. She quickly grabbed a blank sheet of paper, placing it over my practice signatures, and began to carefully guide her pen, meticulously practicing the erratic loops and jagged lines of a broken man. She was completely absorbed in her criminal endeavor, her eyes locked intensely on the paper, dreaming of the millions she was about to steal. She thought she was entirely alone in the room, a brilliant mastermind pulling the strings of a helpless, senile victim. She had no idea that directly above her head, seamlessly integrated into the plastic casing of the newly installed ceiling smoke detector, a microscopic 4K resolution lens was pointed straight down at her hands. The hidden camera captured every single detail with terrifying clarity. It recorded her swapping the medication with illegal sedatives. It recorded her reading the confidential legal documents. And it was currently capturing high-definition, undeniable footage of her actively committing felony forgery. A tiny, virtually invisible red light blinked silently in the dark casing of the detector, locking her fate into a digital vault. The bait had been taken, the trap had violently snapped shut, and Megan had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to absolutely destroy her life. The heavy wooden door of the guest bedroom creaked just loud enough to shatter the tense silence. Megan gasped, her hand jerking violently across the legal pad, leaving a harsh smear of black ink across her latest forged signature. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror, only to find Devin standing in the doorway. He had come upstairs to check on the commotion, annoyed that she had left him alone with the real estate agent on the phone. Now his irritation dissolved into absolute bewilderment. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. He saw the scattered cardboard boxes, the open pill organizer, and the small plastic bag of heavy sedatives resting brazenly on the nightstand. But his gaze quickly locked onto the thick legal documents spread across the carpet. "What are you doing, Megan?" he asked, his voice dropping to a harsh, demanding whisper. "You are supposed to be finding his bank statements, not playing pharmacist." He took another step forward, his expensive leather shoes stepping over a discarded flannel shirt. He looked down at the paper she was desperately trying to hide behind her back. His eyes narrowed as he recognized his father's name printed in large, bold letters across the top of the binder. Devin reached out, grabbing her wrist with a sudden, uncharacteristic firmness. "Give me that," he commanded. Megan hesitated for a fraction of a second before slowly releasing her grip. Devin pulled the document toward him, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. As Devin read the draft of the last will and testament, the remaining color drained from his face. He read the clauses outlining the total liquidation of the massive trust fund. He read the names of the 5 charities. And then he read the specific brutal paragraph explicitly disinheriting him from receiving a single dime of the fortune. His chest heaved, a sudden suffocating panic gripping his lungs. "He is giving it all away," Devin muttered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rising fury. "Every last cent. He is leaving us with absolutely nothing. We are going to be living in a motel by the end of the month." Megan immediately seized the opening. She stepped close to him, placing her hands flat against his chest, her voice dripping with toxic urgency. "He hates you, Devin. He sat in our house eating our food, watching you stress over bills and mortgages, knowing he had millions sitting in a bank account. He tested you, and now he is punishing you just because you finally stood up to him. He does not care about your future. He does not care about Leo. He only cares about his own twisted ego." Devin stared at the blank signature line at the bottom of the page. The crushing reality of his financial ruin loomed over him like a dark shadow. The $6,000 monthly mortgage, the luxury car payments, the private preschool tuition. He was drowning, and the only life raft was currently attached to a document that deliberately excluded him. But forgery, Devin whispered, his eyes darting to the legal pad filled with shaky practice signatures. "Megan, this is a major federal felony. If we get caught, we go to prison. We lose everything anyway. We cannot just rewrite a legal document. Megan gripped his shirt collar, pulling him down to her level, her eyes blazing with absolute unyielding determination. We only lose if we get caught, she hissed, her words calculated to break down his last remaining ethical barriers. Look at him, Devon. He is downstairs rambling about winter boots in the middle of the hallway. He is losing his mind. The cold destroyed him. When the court-appointed doctor evaluates him tomorrow, he is going to be heavily medicated. She tapped the bag of sedatives on the nightstand. He will not even know his own name, let alone remember if he signed a new will. We file the conservatorship, we present the updated will naming us as the sole beneficiaries, and the judge signs off on it. We will have total legal control. We deserve that money, Devon. We earned it by putting up with him. The moral conflict inside Devon raged violently. This was the man who had raised him alone. The man who had worked warehouse shifts until his hands bled just to buy Devon his first suit for a job interview. He remembered the sacrifices, the quiet dignity of his father. But the allure of the millions, the sheer desperation to maintain his fake affluent lifestyle, and the venomous words of his wife slowly eroded decades of paternal loyalty. He convinced himself that his father was already gone, that the man downstairs was just a shell. He looked at the shaky handwriting Megan had been practicing. He thought about the eviction notice waiting to throw him out onto the street. His jaw tightened, the last shred of his morality snapping like a brittle twig. Devon picked up the black ink pen from the nightstand. He looked at Megan, his eyes hardening into a cold, ruthless glare. "You are holding the pen wrong," he said quietly. His handwriting leans slightly to the left when he is tired. "I used to watch him sign delivery manifests for years. If we do this, it has to be completely flawless." Megan smiled, a dark, victorious smirk spreading across her face. She smoothed out a fresh sheet of paper and steadied the binder. "Show me," she whispered. Together, in the quiet dimness of the guest room, the husband and wife meticulously collaborated to steal an empire completely unaware that the blinking red light of the hidden camera above them was recording every single damning word. The next morning, Devon walked into the sleek glass-paneled lobby of his corporate sales firm with a renewed, almost arrogant swagger. The paralyzing fear of impending homelessness that had suffocated him just 24 hours ago had completely vanished. He felt untouchable, completely convinced of his own intellectual superiority. The forged will was locked safely in a fireproof safe at home, a guaranteed ticket to generational wealth. The petition for the emergency medical conservatorship had officially been filed with the family court that morning. The heavy sedatives had already been secretly mixed into his father's morning oatmeal, ensuring Hollis would be docile and incoherent when the authorities arrived. As far as Devon was concerned, the victory was already securely in his hands. He just needed to survive the next 30 days until the legal system officially handed him the keys to the multi-million-dollar trust fund. To bridge the immediate financial gap, Devon had formulated a confident, foolproof plan. He was going to walk directly into the Human Resources Department and request a substantial advance on his upcoming quarterly bonus, or perhaps secure a short-term, high-interest company loan against his future commissions. He had been a top-performing sales director for 3 years. He managed a massive portfolio of elite accounts that generated millions for the corporation. He was a highly valued asset to the firm, practically irreplaceable in his own mind. He straightened his custom-tailored silk tie, checked his reflection in the tinted glass of the elevator doors, and stepped out onto the executive floor. He ignored the strange, pitying looks from the junior associates near the water cooler, attributing their stares to jealousy over his usual commanding presence. He marched confidently down the hallway, ready to demand the cash he needed to keep his luxury facade afloat just a little longer. Before Devon could even reach the Human Resources Department, his desk phone buzzed with an urgent, high-priority internal notification. It was the executive assistant to the regional CEO. Devon was ordered to report to the corner office immediately. He smirked, assuming this was a meeting about a promotion or a new lucrative account assignment. He confidently pushed open the heavy glass doors of the director's office, flashing his signature-winning smile. But the CEO was not smiling. He was standing behind his desk, his face grim, flanked by 2 armed corporate security guards. Devon, the CEO, said, his voice cold and entirely devoid of its usual friendly cadence. "We have a massive, unprecedented crisis. Our largest national client, the account that represents 40% of this entire branch's revenue, just contacted me directly." Devon frowned, his arrogant smile faltering. "What is the issue? I can fix it." The CEO shook his head, sliding a termination folder across the polished desk. "You cannot fix this. They explicitly demanded your immediate unconditional termination. If you are not removed from this building in the next 5 minutes, they are pulling their $20 million contract effective immediately." The air inside courtroom 4B of the Cook County Family Court was thick enough to cut with a knife. The heavy oak doors had swung shut 30 minutes ago, sealing everyone inside a sterile, unforgiving chamber of justice. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, irritating hum that grated against the absolute suffocating silence of the room. Devin sat rigidly at the petitioner's table, his expensive custom-tailored suit feeling more like a suffocating straitjacket than a symbol of his supposed elite status. The devastating shock of being unceremoniously terminated and escorted out of his corporate building by armed security guards just days prior was still fiercely burning in his veins. He had lost his career, his reputation, and his primary source of income in the span of 5 agonizing minutes. This conservatorship hearing was no longer just a greedy power grab to secure his father's massive multi-million-dollar trust fund. It was an absolute desperate fight for his literal survival. If he walked out of this courtroom without total legal and financial control over Hollis, he and Megan would be completely destitute, living on the streets before the end of the month. Megan sat closely beside him, her posture perfectly rigid, her hands delicately folded on the polished wooden table. She wore a modest, conservative beige dress, carefully chosen to project the image of a humble, deeply concerned daughter-in-law. The tension radiating from their side of the room was a volatile, desperate energy. When Judge Miller finally called the hearing to order, Megan was the first to launch into her meticulously rehearsed, Oscar-worthy performance. She stood up slowly, her voice trembling with the exact right amount of manufactured emotional distress. "Your Honor," she began, wiping a perfectly timed, non-existent tear from the corner of her eye. "We are not here today because we want to be. We are here because we are absolutely terrified for my father-in-law's safety. The man sitting across from us is not the brilliant, loving grandfather who helped raise our son. The brutal exposure to the freezing blizzard effectively destroyed his cognitive function. He is completely lost, a danger to himself and others." Megan pulled a crumpled tissue from her purse, dabbing at her dry eyes as she described how she had tirelessly tried to care for him only to be met with severe hostility. "We had to hire a private specialist because he violently refused to go to a standard hospital," she lied smoothly, her voice cracking with practiced precision. Devin stepped up, placing a comforting arm around her waist, playing the role of the devoted husband and deeply concerned son to absolute perfection. "Your Honor," Devin added, his tone dripping with fake sorrow, "my father built a massive, respectable life. But the severe frostbite and the exposure to the blizzard triggered a rapid, terrifying neurological collapse. We are watching the man we love disappear before our very eyes. We just want to protect his legacy from his own erratic decisions." Devin gestured toward the thick stack of legal binders resting on their table. His expensive defense attorney, paid for entirely with maxed-out credit cards, stepped forward to submit the fraudulent evidence. The lawyer handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. Inside that envelope was the medical affidavit from the shady, highly compensated private physician they had hired. The document falsely stated that Hollis was suffering from rapid-onset, irreversible neurological trauma and severe paranoia. But their most audacious, sickening move was yet to come. The lawyer then submitted a crisp, newly printed document in a clear plastic sleeve. "Your Honor," the lawyer stated smoothly, "we are also submitting a legally binding update to the respondent's last will and testament dated just 24 hours before his unfortunate mental collapse. In his final moment of total clarity, realizing his mind was quickly slipping away, Hollis legally entrusted his entire financial estate exclusively to his son and daughter-in-law, ensuring his assets would be managed by the family who loves him." Judge Miller, a magistrate known for his deep compassion in eldercare cases, carefully reviewed the submitted paperwork. He looked down at the forged signature, completely unaware that he was holding a felony forgery. He then looked at Devin and Megan, his expression softening into one of genuine, heartfelt sympathy. It is always a profound tragedy when a brilliant mind succumbs to the ravages of age and trauma, the judge said, his voice laced with gentle understanding. "It is clear to this court that you two have taken on an incredibly heavy, painful burden to care for your ailing father. The presentation was flawless. They had successfully weaponized the legal system using a fake doctor and a forged signature to legally kidnap a multimillionaire. Devin felt a massive euphoric wave of relief wash over him. The judge was completely buying their story. The millions were practically sitting in his bank account. Throughout this entire sickening theatrical display, Hollis remained seated at the respondents' table, resembling a stoic, unmovable statue carved from solid granite. He did not shout in protest. He did not violently pound his fists against the table. He did not interrupt their vicious lies with desperate pleas of his own sanity. His silence was absolute, profound, and deeply terrifyingly unnatural. He wore a sharp, immaculate charcoal gray suit, his posture completely rigid, his hands resting casually on his knees. His dark eyes were locked dead onto Devin, completely devoid of any paternal warmth, anger, or fear. It was the cold, calculating gaze of an apex predator patiently waiting for its prey to step willingly into the center of a lethal trap. That profound, deafening silence began to slowly unnerve Devin. As he sat back down, a cold, creeping dread started to spread through his stomach. He had expected his father to react exactly how an innocent man would react. He expected Hollis to yell, to argue, to desperately try to defend himself against the medical accusations. A frantic, emotionally unstable outburst from Hollis would have perfectly validated their claims of dementia and paranoia. But Hollis gave them absolutely nothing. He just sat there, a silent, looming titan, watching them meticulously build a mountain of federal perjury. Devin shifted uncomfortably in his wooden chair, his arrogant confidence suddenly faltering. Why was his father so calm? Why was he allowing them to legally assassinate his character without throwing a single punch? The terrifying realization that he might have walked blindly into a slaughterhouse suddenly flashed across Devin's mind. Judge Miller neatly stacked the forged documents and looked over his reading glasses toward the defense table. Mr. Bradley, the judge, addressed Hollis's lead attorney. Given the severe medical evidence and the updated testamentary documents submitted by the petitioners, does the defense have any final statements before I issue my ruling on this emergency conservatorship? Bradley, who had been sitting just as silently and motionlessly as his billionaire client, slowly stood up. He calmly buttoned his suit jacket, his face a mask of lethal, unyielding professionalism. He did not hold a stack of medical records or character references. He held only a small, sleek black remote control. Your Honor. Bradley said, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. The defense strongly contests every single document submitted by the petitioners today. In fact, we do not just contest them. We intend to prove that they are the product of a malicious, coordinated criminal conspiracy. Before you issue any ruling regarding my client's mental capacity or his financial estate, the defense formally requests permission to submit a single piece of digital evidence to the court. I need to play a video. Judge Miller nodded, his curiosity visibly piqued by the defense's unorthodox request. He gestured toward the large multimedia projector screen mounted on the right wall of the courtroom. Bradley did not say another word. He simply aimed the small black remote and pressed a single button. The massive screen flickered to life, illuminating the dim wood-paneled room with a startlingly bright, crystal-clear image in pristine 4K resolution. The entire courtroom held its collective breath. The camera angle was positioned from high above, looking directly down onto the familiar hardwood floor and queen-sized bed of the guest room in Devin and Megan's heavily subsidized suburban estate. The audio was impeccable, picking up the quiet, ambient hum of the central air conditioning. Then the heavy wooden door of the bedroom creaked open on the screen. The high-definition lens captured Megan slipping into the room like a ghost, her eyes darting nervously around the intentionally scattered cardboard boxes and discarded flannel shirts. Devin stared at the screen, his mouth dropping open in absolute, unadulterated horror. The smug, confident facade he had worn just seconds ago shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Megan physically recoiled in her wooden chair, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as she watched a giant Ultra HD version of herself tiptoe directly toward her father-in-law's nightstand. The suffocating silence in the courtroom amplified the booming sound of her footsteps echoing from the high-quality speakers. Everyone was paralyzed watching a meticulously planned crime unfold in real time. On the massive screen, Megan pulled a small, unmistakable plastic bag filled with heavy prescription-grade sedatives from her designer pocket. The courtroom speakers amplified the crinkling sound of the plastic as her manicured fingers deftly opened Hollis's daily pill organizer. The high-definition lens zoomed in, automatically capturing the exact moment she maliciously swapped out his harmless blood pressure medication and standard vitamin supplements for the powerful mind-altering tranquilizers. A collective horrified gasp echoed through the gallery. Judge Miller sat completely frozen, his eyes wide, his pen slipping from his fingers and clattering loudly onto his desk. But the digital nightmare for the petitioners was far from over. The video continued, showing Megan accidentally knocking the thick leather binder off the nightstand. The camera caught her panicked expression as she scrambled to gather the spilled documents, her eyes locking onto the draft of the last will and testament. The microphone picked up her ragged, greedy breathing as she realized the massive trust fund was destined for charity and that she and Devon were explicitly disinherited. Then the ultimate betrayal played out for the entire legal system to witness. Megan grabbed a black ink pen and began practicing the erratic, shaky signature of a cognitively impaired man. The door on the screen opened again and Devon walked into the frame. The audio captured his voice with terrifying clarity. He demanded to know what she was doing. He read the document. And then the entire courtroom heard the undeniable sound of a son agreeing to legally assassinate his own father's legacy. "We only lose if we get caught." Megan's voice hissed through the courtroom speakers, the audio perfectly balanced. "He will not even know his own name, let alone remember if he signed a new will." Devon's voice followed, sealing their collective fate. "You are holding the pen wrong." His handwriting leans slightly to the left when he is tired. "I used to watch him sign delivery manifests for years. If we do this, it has to be completely flawless." Devon sat at the petitioner's table, physically trembling, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a prison uniform. He looked over at his highly compensated defense attorney, desperately expecting him to jump up, shout an objection, and cite some obscure privacy law to strike the video from the record. But the attorney was completely paralyzed. The man had built a lucrative career on aggressive litigation, but he was not a fool. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He had just formally submitted a forged document and a fraudulent medical affidavit to a sitting judge, making him an unwitting accomplice to a massive federal felony. The lawyer slowly pushed his chair away from Devon and Megan, physically and symbolically distancing himself from the toxic, radioactive fallout of their crimes. He did not utter a single syllable of defense. The video concluded with the two of them meticulously crafting the exact same fraudulent signature that currently sat in a clear plastic sleeve on the judge's desk. The screen faded to pitch black, leaving the courtroom plunged back into a heavy, suffocating, and deadly silence. Hollis remained seated exactly as he had been the entire time, his posture immaculate, his dark eyes locked onto the empty screen. He had not just defeated them. He had engineered a scenario where they enthusiastically destroyed themselves on a public stage. The absolute silence in the courtroom was violently shattered by the explosive, echoing crack of a wooden gavel. Judge Miller struck his sounding block with such ferocious intensity that the noise made everyone in the room flinch. The compassionate, gentle demeanor he had shown just moments ago had completely vanished, replaced by an inferno of righteous, unadulterated judicial fury. The judge's face was flushed a deep, angry crimson. He stood up from his leather chair, leaning aggressively over his elevated bench, pointing a trembling finger directly at the petitioner's table. "In all my years sitting on this bench, I have never witnessed such a repulsive, cold-blooded, and purely evil manipulation of the family court system." Judge Miller roared, his voice thundering with absolute authority. "You sat in my courtroom, shed crocodile tears, and looked me dead in the eye while attempting to use this legal institution to commit grand larceny, elder abuse, and the premeditated chemical assault of your own father." The judge picked up the forged will and the fraudulent medical affidavit they had submitted. He held the documents up as if they were physically contaminated. "This petition for conservatorship is hereby dismissed with extreme prejudice. I am formally referring both of you to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal prosecution. Furthermore, I am issuing a bench warrant for the arrest of the private physician who signed this fabricated medical evaluation. You arrogant fools thought you could turn my courtroom into a crime scene." Devon buried his face in his hands, letting out a dry, broken sob as the full weight of his complete destruction finally crushed him. Megan stared blankly ahead, completely catatonic. Her mind unable to process how rapidly her millionaire dreams had turned into a guaranteed prison sentence. Before the judge could even finish writing his formal directive, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud, authoritative crash. 4 uniformed police officers accompanied by 2 plainclothes detectives marched directly down the center aisle. Their heavy boots echoed against the polished floor, a sound that signaled the absolute end of the line for the greedy couple. A female officer stepped directly up to the petitioner's table, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her tactical belt. "Megan, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of a legal document, and felony elder endangerment," the officer announced, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. Megan shrieked a high-pitched sound of pure panic as the officer forcefully pulled her arms behind her back. The cold steel ratcheted tightly around her wrists with a sharp final click. Right there in the middle of the courthouse, the wealthy, arrogant daughter-in-law was reduced to a common criminal. Devin watched helplessly as the officers hauled his screaming wife away, knowing his own arrest was only moments away. Devin sat shivering in the freezing, windowless interrogation room of the Chicago police precinct. The stark contrast between the luxurious mahogany of the family court and the chipped gray paint of these cinder-block walls was nauseating. His expensive custom-tailored suit, a symbol of his fabricated corporate success, now felt like a clown costume. The heavy steel handcuffs chafed mercilessly against his wrists, grounding him in a terrifying new reality. He was no longer a high-flying sales director. He was a felony suspect awaiting booking. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, sickly shadows across the scarred metal table bolted to the floor. Across the hallway, behind a thick pane of one-way glass, he knew Megan was sitting in an identical room. His heart hammered a frantic, erratic rhythm against his ribs. He clung to the desperate, naive hope that they would present a united front, that she would stick to the script they had desperately whispered to each other in the back of the squad car. "We deny everything. We say we were trying to help him. We say the video is a misunderstanding." He repeated the mantra in his head like a desperate prayer. He believed that their marriage, their shared ambition, and their mutual greed would bind them together in this crisis. He had destroyed his relationship with the man who raised him just to keep her happy. He assumed she possessed the same twisted loyalty. He was catastrophically wrong. The heavy steel door swung open, bringing a rush of stale air and 2 hardened detectives. Detective Vance, a veteran with tired eyes and a thick file tucked under his arm, tossed a digital audio recorder onto the metal table. He did not sit down. He just leaned over the table, staring at Devin with a look of absolute disgust. "You really know how to pick them," Devin Vance said, his voice dripping with cynical amusement. "Your wife has been in the other room for exactly 12 minutes. She did not even ask for a lawyer. She just started talking." Devin felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. "What do you mean she started talking? We have the right to an attorney. I am not saying a word until I get legal counsel." Vance chuckled, pulling a chair out and scraping it loudly against the concrete floor. "That is fine by me, but I thought you might want to hear what your loving spouse has to say about your family dynamic." Vance pressed the play button on the small device. The crisp, pristine audio of the interrogation room next door filled the silence. Megan's voice echoed from the small speaker, completely devoid of the tears she had weaponized in the courtroom. It was a rapid, frantic, and entirely calculated confession. "I did not want to do it," she cried on the recording, her tone shifting seamlessly into the role of a terrified victim. "Devin forced me. He told me that if I did not swap the medication and forge that signature, he would cut me off and leave me with nothing. He has been financially abusive for years. He hated his father. He was furious that Hollis had millions while we were drowning in debt from his failed investments. He made me do it. He stood over me and forced my hand while I held the pen. I was terrified of him." Devin sat paralyzed, all the oxygen violently sucked from his lungs. His own wife, the woman he had actively conspired with, the woman who had originally suggested the vile plan to institutionalize his father, had just handed him a 15-year prison sentence wrapped in a neat tear-stained bow. He stared at the recorder, his mind refusing to process the magnitude of the betrayal. She was the one who bought the sedatives. She was the one who found the draft of the will. He had just been a willing, greedy accomplice. "She is lying," Devin screamed, lunging forward until the steel chain of his handcuffs jerked him violently back against the chair. "She bought the pills. She planned the entire thing. She is the one who pawned the ring and blamed my father. You saw the pawn shop photos. You cannot believe her." Detective Vance stopped the recording and leaned in close. "Oh, we do not believe her, Devin. We have the hidden camera footage perfectly demonstrating that this was a joint premeditated effort. But she is practically doing backflips to sign a plea deal that paints you as the criminal mastermind. She is offering to testify against you in federal court to reduce her own sentence. She threw you to the wolves the second the handcuffs clicked. Devon slumped back in his chair, utterly defeated. The thick, intoxicating illusion of his perfect marriage shattered into a million jagged pieces. He had sacrificed his devoted, loving father for a woman who sold him out to the police in less than a quarter of an hour. The sickening realization of his profound stupidity burned like acid in his veins. He was completely alone. Hours later, the heavy iron gates of the precinct buzzed and slid open. Devon stepped out into the freezing Chicago night, shivering uncontrollably in his thin, ruined suit jacket. He had managed to secure a temporary release pending arraignment, draining the absolute last remnants of his emergency credit to pay a local bail bondsman an exorbitant non-refundable fee. The icy wind hit him like a physical blow, a harsh reminder of the storm he had forced his father into just days ago. He had no phone, no wallet, and absolutely no prospects. His career as a top-tier corporate sales director had been completely incinerated. His reputation was highly publicized collateral damage. He walked aimlessly down the poorly lit street, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the icy pavement. The crushing weight of his monumental failure pressed down on him with every step. He had possessed everything a man could possibly want. A stable upbringing, a brilliant education funded by a father who worked his hands to the bone, and a direct path to a multi-million-dollar inheritance. He had traded all of it away for the toxic validation of a woman who despised his roots and viewed him as nothing more than a convenient financial vehicle. Megan had manipulated his insecurities, isolated him from his blood, and the moment the ship began to sink, she had strapped on the only life vest and kicked him into the freezing ocean. He hailed a cheap, battered taxi, promising the skeptical driver he had emergency cash stashed at his house. The taxi pulled up to the sprawling, upscale suburban estate. Devon stepped out into the snow, his eyes widening in absolute horror. The front lawn was a chaotic, humiliating graveyard of his former life. His expensive tailored suits, his custom golf clubs, his luxury watches, and his meticulously collected wine bottles were thrown indiscriminately across the freezing, snow-covered grass. Hollis had not waited the full 30 days. He had executed an immediate emergency eviction protocol based on the criminal felony charges. Devon ran toward the front door, his breath hitching in his throat. A heavy industrial-grade steel padlock was secured through a thick chain around the door handles. Plastered directly at eye level was a bright neon orange legally binding notice from the county sheriff's department explicitly forbidding his entry under the penalty of immediate arrest. The house was completely sealed. He stood alone in the freezing dark, surrounded by the pathetic, ruined remnants of his fake, subsidized life, finally understanding exactly what it felt like to be completely discarded. The following morning, the atmosphere inside Bradley's downtown law firm was a stark contrast to the freezing, chaotic nightmare Devon was currently enduring. I sat comfortably in a plush leather armchair, the warm sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminating the pristine mahogany conference table. Spread out across this polished wood was the complete, unredacted financial autopsy of my son's spectacularly ruined life. Bradley stood at the head of the table, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, holding a stack of freshly printed bank statements and credit reports. He had deployed a team of forensic accountants the moment the conservatorship petition was filed, digging deep into the financial mechanics of Devon and Megan's household. I took a slow sip of my hot black coffee, feeling a profound sense of vindication mixed with a heavy paternal sorrow. I had spent decades building wealth, carefully navigating a system designed to keep black men at the bottom, and I had tried to instill that same financial discipline in Devon. Instead, he had handed the keys to his financial future over to a woman who viewed him as an endless line of credit. Bradley sighed, shaking his head as he tapped a thick red folder resting in the center of the table. Hollis, he began, his tone entirely professional but laced with disbelief. I knew your son was living significantly beyond his means, even with your massive monthly housing subsidy. But what we found buried in these secondary credit reports goes far beyond simple, irresponsible spending. This is a deliberate, systematic financial dismantling. Bradley opened the red folder and slid a series of highlighted documents toward me. I want you to look closely at these loan originations, he instructed. For the past 3 years, Megan has been living a completely separate, heavily financed, secret life. While Devon was stressing over paying the basic utility bills and maintaining his arrogant corporate facade, his wife was quietly opening high-interest personal loans and premium credit cards. The total amount is staggering. She has racked up exactly $80,000 in unsecured debt. I stared at the numbers, my jaw tightening. $80,000, that was not pocket change. That was a down payment on a commercial property. That was a college fund for my grandson. How did she manage to secure that much credit without Devin knowing? I asked, scanning the terrifyingly high interest rates attached to the accounts. She forged his digital signature, Bradley stated flatly. She used his social security number, his corporate income verification, and his employment history to apply for everything online. Because they are legally married, the lending institutions did not require secondary physical verification. She intercepted the mail, opted for paperless billing, and routed all the digital statements to a hidden email address. Devin never saw a single piece of correspondence. And what exactly did she spend $80,000 on? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be entirely superficial. Bradley pulled out an itemized expense report. It reads like a catalog of sheer vanity, he explained, pointing down the list. $15,000 on luxury spa retreats with her friends. $20,000 on designer handbags and shoes. She took out a $10,000 cash advance just to fund that lavish trip to the Bahamas last year, the one she told Devin her parents had paid for. The rest of the money was used in a desperate Ponzi scheme format, taking out new loans to pay the minimum monthly balances on the old ones just to keep the collection agencies from calling the house. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, illuminating the dark, chaotic desperation behind Megan's recent actions. This massive hidden mountain of debt was the exact reason she had completely panicked over the engagement ring. She was drowning in secret financial obligations and needed quick, untraceable cash to pay an impending loan installment. When she realized the pawnshop money was not going to be enough to keep the house of cards from collapsing, she pivoted to the ultimate payday. She decided to institutionalize me and hijack my multi-million-dollar trust fund. She was not just greedy. She was backed into a corner of her own making, and she was fully prepared to destroy my life to save her own skin. She used my son as a human shield, and a blank check, I murmured, my voice cold and hard. And Devin was so desperately eager for her validation, so eager to fit into her privileged white world, that he never once bothered to look at his own financial foundation. He let her steer the ship right off a cliff. Bradley nodded grimly. Legally, Devin is entirely on the hook for this debt. Because it was acquired during the marriage using his credentials, the creditors will aggressively pursue him. His credit score is completely obliterated. Even if he avoids prison time for the forgery and fraud charges related to the conservatorship, he is facing total inescapable bankruptcy. He will not be able to rent an apartment, lease a car, or secure a decent job in the financial sector for at least a decade. Megan did not just betray him to the police last night. She had been methodically destroying his future every single day for the last 3 years. Right on cue, as if summoned by the sheer weight of his monumental failure, my cell phone began to vibrate on the conference table. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, likely a cheap burner phone or a borrowed device from a sympathetic stranger. I let it ring 3 times before calmly pressing the green button and lifting the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. I just waited. "Dad!" a voice croaked through the speaker. It was Devin. His voice was completely shattered, trembling violently with cold and unfiltered panic. The arrogant, commanding tone of the corporate sales director was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic, ragged breathing of a broken man. "Dad, please do not hang up. I am standing outside the house. Everything is gone. My clothes, my things, they are all in the snow. The door has a police lock on it." I leaned back in my leather chair, listening to the howling wind through the phone receiver. It was the exact same sound I had heard when he shoved me out onto the porch. "You received your 30-day eviction notice," I replied smoothly. "And due to your subsequent felony conspiracy charges against the property owner, the timeline was legally expedited. You are trespassing on my property, Devin. Step away from the house." "Dad, please, you have to help me," Devin begged, his voice breaking into a loud, humiliating sob. "Megan set me up. She told the detectives that I forced her to forge the will. She told them I planned the whole thing. I spent my last dime on a bail bondsman. I lost my job yesterday. They fired me and threw me out of the building. I have no money. I am freezing out here. I have nowhere to go. Please, I am your son. Let me inside. Just for one night. I will do whatever you want. I will go to rehab. I will go to counseling. Just do not leave me out here to die." He was crying hysterically now, the reality of his $80,000 debt and his impending prison sentence finally crushing his spirit into dust. He wanted the father he had so viciously discarded to swoop in and rescue him from the consequences of his own toxic choices. I listened to him cry, feeling the absolute stillness of my own heart. There was a time when his tears would have moved me to move mountains. But that time ended the moment he chose a racist, manipulative woman over the man who gave him life. Devin, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, icy whisper. Do you remember the blizzard? Do you remember how the wind sounded when you grabbed my arm and dragged me to the front door? Do you remember looking me in the eye, calling me a useless burden, and telling me to get out? The crying on the other end of the line suddenly stopped, replaced by a sharp, horrified intake of breath. Dad, Devin whispered, terrified by the deadly calm in my voice. I was wearing a thin flannel shirt. I continued my words, striking him with the precision of a scalpel. You locked the door. You went back to your warm bed with the woman who stole from you, and you left me on the concrete to freeze to death. You did not care that I was your father then. I stood outside in the storm, Devin. Now it is your turn. I pressed the red button ending the call. I placed the phone face down on the polished mahogany table and looked up at Bradley. Proceed with the final phase, I instructed quietly. It is time to get my grandson. While I sat in Bradley's office finalizing the legal paperwork to rescue my grandson, Devin was executing a desperate, pathetic plan of his own across the city. Refusing to accept the reality of his termination the previous afternoon, Devin had managed to clean himself up in a public restroom after spending a grueling, freezing night huddled in the vestibule of a 24-hour laundromat. Driven by absolute delusion and the crushing weight of his $80,000 debt, he marched right back into his former corporate headquarters. He bypassed the front reception desk by tailgating a group of junior executives through the security gates. He marched straight up to the executive floor and ambushed the regional chief executive officer right as the man was unlocking his office door. Devin barged inside, his usual polished arrogance replaced by a frantic, sweat-drenched desperation. He begged. The man who had sneered at my worn flannel shirts and manual labor background literally dropped to his knees on the imported corporate carpeting. He pleaded with the chief executive to reinstate him, citing his 3 years of stellar sales records and the millions of dollars in revenue he had personally generated for the firm. He swore he would work for half his usual salary. He claimed the criminal charges against him were a massive misunderstanding generated by a vindictive wife. He promised he could smooth over whatever issues the anonymous client had raised. He begged for a second chance, for a severance package, for an advance, for absolutely anything to keep him from drowning. The chief executive officer stood behind his massive desk, his expression a mixture of profound disgust and cold corporate detachment. He did not offer Devin a chair. He did not offer him a glass of water. He simply watched my son grovel on the floor like a desperate beggar. I knew exactly how this interaction played out because the chief executive officer and I were very close associates. I had personally handpicked his firm to manage the logistics contracts for my entire commercial real estate portfolio. When Devin finally stopped his frantic rambling, the chief executive let out a heavy sigh and picked up a thick black leather folder from his desk. He tossed it forcefully onto the glass surface, the loud smack echoing through the quiet executive suite. He looked down at Devin, completely unmoved by the pathetic display of tears. "You do not seem to understand the magnitude of your situation, Devin," the chief executive stated, his voice echoing with absolute freezing authority. "You are operating under the incredibly naive assumption that your termination was the result of a simple performance issue or a minor contractual dispute. You think you can charm your way out of this with your usual sales tactics. You think you can negotiate. You cannot negotiate with a nuclear bomb." Devin scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting to the black folder on the desk. He wiped his sweaty forehead, his hands trembling violently. "Sir, I can fix this," Devin pleaded, his voice cracking under the intense strain. "Just tell me who the client is. Let me talk to them. I have the highest retention rate in this entire building. I can smooth this over. I know how to manage these high net worth accounts. Just give me one meeting with them." The chief executive let out a harsh, mocking laugh. It was a sound completely devoid of any humor. "You really want to know who demanded your immediate, unconditional termination?" the chief executive asked, leaning heavily over the glass desk. "You want to know which client holds a $20 million logistics contract with our firm? A contract so massive that your presence in this building was considered a toxic liability." The chief executive opened the black folder and spun it around so Devin could read the bold, capitalized heading on the primary contract. Devin leaned forward, his bloodshot eyes scanning the crisp legal document. His breath hitched violently in his throat. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a walking corpse. The name printed at the top of the $20 million account was not a faceless corporate conglomerate. It was the Hollis Family Trust. Devin stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object. His mind violently short-circuited as he stared at his own father's name stamped across the most lucrative contract in the entire building. The memories of him bragging about his corporate success while eating my subsidized food flooded his mind, twisting into a sharp, agonizing realization of his own pathetic insignificance. The Hollis Family Trust. The chief executive repeated, letting the words hang in the heavy air like an executioner's sentence. The founder and primary shareholder of that trust personally contacted me yesterday. He informed me that you were currently under federal investigation for felony elder abuse, forgery, and financial conspiracy. He made it explicitly clear that if you remained employed by this firm for even one more hour, he would pull every single one of his contracts and ruin this branch. You did not just lose a client, Devin. You actively tried to institutionalize and steal from a man who possesses more wealth and power than our entire executive board combined. You tried to destroy a titan of industry because you thought he was a helpless, broke old man. You brought that radioactive liability to my doorstep, and you honestly thought I would let you stay. The crushing realization of his absolute stupidity hit Devin with the force of a collapsing skyscraper. He staggered backward, his legs giving out as he crashed into a leather armchair. His entire corporate identity, his inflated ego, and his false sense of superiority were utterly annihilated. He had spent years treating me like a pathetic, uneducated burden. He had allowed his racist, manipulative wife to convince him that I was nothing more than a street-level hustler holding him back from his elite destiny. Now, standing in the very office he had once aspired to occupy, he finally understood the terrifying truth. I was the silent hand feeding his entire corporate ecosystem. I was the phantom billionaire keeping his company afloat. He had bitten the hand that literally paved the streets he walked on. Please. Devin whimpered, his voice completely broken, stripped of all human dignity. He is my father. He is just angry. I can talk to him. I can make it right. Please do not do this to me. The chief executive officer picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button. Security, he said coldly. We have a trespasser in the executive suite. Send an escort immediately. 2 heavily built armed security guards burst through the double doors less than 30 seconds later. They did not treat Devin like a respected former colleague. They grabbed him aggressively by the arms, hauling him up from the armchair. Devin kicked and screamed, thrashing wildly as they dragged him out of the office. He yelled my name, begging for a second chance, pleading for mercy as the entire floor of junior associates watched his humiliating public downfall. The guards dragged him into the service elevator, effectively erasing him from the corporate world forever. The guards physically tossed Devin out the back service exit, sending him crashing onto the freezing concrete of the loading dock. He scrambled to his feet, bruised, freezing, and utterly defeated. He stumbled toward the employee parking structure, desperately hoping to seek refuge inside his expensive imported luxury sedan to escape the biting Chicago wind. But as he rounded the corner, his heart plummeted into the icy pavement. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck was currently backing up to his gleaming black vehicle. A representative from his financing bank stood nearby holding a clipboard. Because Megan had completely obliterated his credit and he had missed 3 consecutive massive payments, the bank had triggered an immediate repossession order. Devin sprinted forward, waving his arms and screaming at the driver to stop, but the repo agent simply handed him a formal legal notice and told him to step back. Devin stood completely paralyzed in the freezing cold, watching the tow truck haul his last remaining asset out of the parking lot. He had no job, no house, no wife, no car, and absolutely no money. He was completely, irrevocably empty-handed. While Devin stood completely paralyzed in the freezing dark, watching the tow truck haul his last remaining asset out of the parking lot, I was sitting miles away in the secure, quiet confines of Bradley's downtown law firm. The absolute destruction of my son's corporate and financial life was complete, but my primary focus had always been protecting the innocent child caught in the crossfire of his parents' monumental greed. Just as Bradley handed me the final emergency custody affidavit to review, my private cell phone vibrated sharply against the polished mahogany table. The caller ID displayed an unknown local number. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear without speaking. On the other end, a sharp, ragged breath filled the heavy silence. It was Megan. She had somehow managed to secure a temporary release on bail, likely draining the absolute last of her hidden fraudulent credit lines to pay a desperate high-risk bail bondsman. Hollis. She snapped, her voice stripped of all its previous fake sweetness, replaced by the frantic, venomous tone of a cornered animal. Do not hang up this phone. If you disconnect, you will never see Leo again. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, signaling for Bradley to immediately trace and record the call. I remained perfectly silent, letting her panic echo through the line. I know you destroyed Devon. She continued, her breathing erratic and fast. I know he is on the street. I do not care about him. He is a weak loser. But I have Leo. I picked him up from his private preschool before the police could freeze my access to him. He is sitting right next to me in a rental car, and we are driving far away from Chicago. The sheer, unfiltered malice in her voice confirmed exactly what kind of monster I was dealing with. She was not a mother calling to ensure the safety of her child amidst a family crisis. She was a desperate fugitive, actively holding her own flesh and blood hostage to secure a lucrative payday. You have no money, Megan, I stated, my voice echoing with a lethal, absolute calm. Your accounts are completely frozen. Your husband is destitute. You are facing decades in federal prison for forgery and elder abuse. Running with a child will only add felony kidnapping across state lines to your rapidly growing list of charges. Megan let out a harsh, chaotic laugh that sounded completely unhinged, vibrating with pure, toxic arrogance. You think I care about those charges right now? She shouted, the desperation bleeding violently through her facade. I have absolutely nothing left to lose, Hollis. Your little hidden camera trick ruined my entire life. But you have a massive weakness. You love this kid. You sat in that miserable guest room and endured my rules just to be near him. So here is exactly how this is going to work. I want $1 million. Untraceable cash or a certified wire transfer into an offshore account that my lawyer can access immediately. $1 million, and I will hand over full, uncontested physical and legal custody of Leo directly to you. I will sign the relinquishment papers right now. If you refuse or if you call the police, I will disappear. I will drag this boy through endless, agonizing custody battles in jurisdictions you cannot control. I will make sure he grows up knowing you chose your precious money over his safety. I could hear little Leo crying softly in the background of the call. The sound of my grandson sobbing, confused and terrified by his mother's erratic behavior, sent a violent surge of protective rage through my veins. Megan was treating a 4-year-old boy like a piece of stolen property to be fenced at a pawn shop. She possessed absolutely no maternal instinct. Leo was nothing but a convenient biological asset to her, a human shield to protect her from the devastating consequences of her own criminal actions. She was willing to traumatize her own son, rip him away from his home, and drag him into a life on the run, all to extort the man she had tried to institutionalize. $1 million for a child, I repeated, ensuring Bradley captured the explicit extortion demand on the recording. You are selling your son. Megan did not even hesitate. Do not preach morality to me, you old fool, she snapped viciously. He is an anchor dragging me down. I need a fresh start, and I need capital to fight these ridiculous felony charges. You have a multi-million-dollar trust fund. $1 million is pocket change to you. Buy him from me, Hollis, or I swear to God I will vanish with him before the sun goes down. The absolute cold-blooded nature of her demand was breathtaking. She was entirely disconnected from reality, fueled by pure, unadulterated greed and a desperate need to escape the ruin she had engineered. She believed she finally had the upper hand, thinking she had backed me into an emotional corner where my vast wealth was my only way out. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl insults or threaten her with the authorities. I knew that dealing with a desperate cornered predator required absolute icy precision. I let a heavy, calculated silence stretch across the line, acting as if I was deeply conflicted, as if she had truly found the singular crack in my impenetrable armor. Fine, I said, my voice dropping to a low, defeated register, perfectly mimicking the sound of a broken, desperate grandfather willing to surrender his fortune. You win, Megan. I will give you the $1 million. Just do not hurt him. Do not take him out of the city. I heard a sharp gasp of triumphant relief on the other end of the line. Her arrogant, entitled demeanor instantly returned, completely masking her prior panic. I knew you would see reason, she gloated, her voice dripping with toxic satisfaction. You always were soft when it came to that kid. Have your lawyers draft the custody relinquishment forms. I want them ironclad, stating that you assume all financial responsibility for him moving forward and that I am completely severed from any legal obligations. And I want the money ready today. Bradley handed me a notepad, quickly scribbling down the legal parameters of the trap we were about to spring. I understand the terms, I replied smoothly, playing my part to perfection. But I am not doing a wire transfer. Those can be frozen by the authorities the moment your bail gets revoked. I will give you a certified cashier's check drawn directly from a secure corporate account that is not tied to my personal name. It will clear instantly and you can cash it at any major branch before the police even know you are gone. Megan greedily accepted the terms, her mind already spending the money she thought she had successfully extorted. Bring the check and the custody papers to the Silver Bean Coffee Shop on 4th Street at exactly 4 p.m, I instructed in a resigned tone. It is public secure and right down the street from a major bank branch. You bring Leo, sign the documents, and walk away with your $1 million. Perfect, she replied sharply. Come alone, Hollis. If I see a single police cruiser, the deal is completely off. She hung up the phone with a sharp click. I slowly lowered the device, looking across the mahogany table at Bradley, who was already contacting the local precinct task force. Megan thought she had masterfully outsmarted me, believing she had just secured a $1 million golden parachute. She was entirely unaware that the coffee shop on 4th Street was owned and operated by my commercial real estate firm. She had absolutely no idea that I had just meticulously orchestrated her final inescapable downfall. I arrived at the Silver Bean Coffee Shop precisely 45 minutes before the scheduled exchange. The afternoon sun cast long, cold shadows across the bustling 4th Street pavement, but inside the cafe the atmosphere was warm and perfectly controlled. I sat in a secluded corner booth facing the front entrance, a steaming cup of black tea resting untouched on the table in front of me. I did not choose this location by accident. I owned the entire commercial building, and my security team had complete access to the high-definition surveillance network covering every square inch of the property. At exactly 4:00, the heavy glass door swung open, bringing a sharp gust of freezing wind into the shop. Megan walked in, tightly gripping the wrist of my 4-year-old grandson, Leo. The transformation in her appearance was jarring. The impeccably groomed, arrogant woman who had sneered at my flannel shirts just weeks ago was completely gone. Her designer clothes were heavily wrinkled. Her hair was tied back in a messy, frantic knot, and she wore oversized dark sunglasses in a pathetic attempt to hide her identity. She looked like exactly what she was, a desperate cornered fugitive running out of time. Leo looked terrified, his small eyes darting around the unfamiliar coffee shop. When he saw me sitting in the corner booth, a look of pure relief washed over his face. He tried to pull away from his mother and run to me, but Megan yanked his arm back with a harsh, aggressive jerk. "Not yet," she snapped at the boy, her voice tight with anxiety. She dragged him over to my booth and slid into the seat directly across from me, keeping Leo wedged tightly against the wall. She did not bother with pleasantries or fake apologies. She leaned across the table, her eyes darting nervously toward the front windows. "Do you have the money, Hollis?" she demanded, her voice a harsh, impatient whisper. I did not flinch. I slowly opened my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents flawlessly drafted by Bradley just an hour prior. I slid the papers across the smooth wooden table, along with a black ink pen. "These are the custody relinquishment forms," I stated with absolute, unwavering authority. "They explicitly grant me full, irrevocable physical and legal custody of Leo. They sever all your parental rights and state that you are surrendering him willingly without coercion. Sign every page, initial every clause, and you will get your $1 million. Megan did not even bother to read the terms. She did not hesitate to legally abandon the child sitting right next to her. Fueled by pure, unadulterated greed and the desperate need to escape her impending prison sentence, she snatched the pen and began signing her name with a frantic, chaotic energy. She slashed her signature across every single line, permanently trading her son for a payday she believed would secure her freedom. She tossed the pen down, a toxic, triumphant smirk spreading across her pale face. "I win, old man," she gloated. "Now hand over the check." I reached out and carefully collected the signed custody documents. I took my time meticulously verifying every single signature and initial to ensure the paperwork was completely airtight and legally binding. Once I was satisfied, I placed the documents securely inside my leather briefcase and locked the heavy brass clasps with a sharp, definitive click. Only then did I look at my grandson. "Come here, Leo," I said softly. Megan rolled her eyes and stepped aside, finally releasing her grip on the boy. Leo scrambled out of the booth and ran straight into my arms, burying his face in my heavy winter coat. I wrapped a protective arm around him, pulling him close to my chest. My bloodline was finally safe. Megan snapped her fingers impatiently, her greedy eyes locked on my breast pocket. "The check, Hollis," she hissed aggressively. "Hand it over before I make a scene and walk out of here." I reached into my pocket and slowly withdrew a crisp white envelope. I placed it on the table and slid it across the polished wood. Megan ripped the envelope open like a starving scavenger tearing into a carcass. She pulled out the heavy watermarked cashier's check, her eyes widening to the size of saucers as she saw the string of zeros printed across the paper. $1 million. A wide, manic grin stretched across her face, completely transforming her expression into one of sheer, arrogant victory. She actually believed she had successfully extorted a billionaire. She thought she had outsmarted the system, beaten the felony forgery charges, and secured her luxury lifestyle abroad. But as her greedy eyes scanned the rest of the official document, that triumphant grin violently faltered. The color rapidly drained from her cheeks, melting her arrogant expression into a mask of pure confusion, followed immediately by sheer, suffocating horror. "What is this?" Megan whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably as she read the payee line. "Read it out loud." "Megan," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, absolute register that commanded the space between us. She stared at the heavy paper, her hands trembling so violently the check audibly rattled. "Pay to the order of the Internal Revenue Service," she stammered, her breath hitching in her throat. She looked down at the memo line, her eyes darting back and forth as if hoping the words would miraculously change. "Payment in full for federal tax evasion penalties and outstanding liabilities regarding Megan." I leaned forward, locking my gaze onto her panicked, terrified eyes. "When Bradley's forensic accountants dug into your $80,000 of secret personal loans, they found something much more interesting," I explained with icy surgical precision. "You did not just forge my son's signature to get premium credit cards. You set up a series of fraudulent online shell corporations to hide your income. You claimed massive, entirely fake business losses to avoid paying your federal taxes for the past 5 years to fund your luxury vacations. You stole from banks, but you also stole from the federal government. The IRS takes a very dim view of wire fraud and multi-year tax evasion. You cannot do this." Megan gasped, the catastrophic reality of the trap violently closing in on her. "This check is completely useless to me. I cannot cash a check made out to the government. I need liquid money to run." "You do not need money to run," I replied, my tone devoid of any human sympathy. "You are not going anywhere. I told you on the phone that I would bring a certified check for $1 million, and I did exactly that. I never once stated it would be payable to you. I simply paid off the massive federal debt you accumulated, ensuring my grandson will never be legally or financially associated with a convicted tax cheat. You just eagerly sold your absolute last bargaining chip for a tax payment you can never touch." The complete, devastating annihilation of her master plan hit Megan like a physical blow to the chest. The money she thought would buy her freedom, her luxury life overseas, and her escape from the looming felony forgery charges was entirely a phantom illusion. She had absolutely nothing. Her credit was destroyed, her husband was destitute, and she had just eagerly signed away the only leverage she possessed in exchange for a piece of paper that only benefited the federal government. A primal, furious scream erupted from her throat, shattering the quiet, ambient atmosphere of the coffee shop. "You tricked me!" she shrieked, her face turning a violent, blotchy shade of crimson. "You set this whole thing up!" She lunged across the wooden table, her hands clawing desperately toward my locked leather briefcase. "Give me those papers back!" she screamed, her arms flailing wildly as she knocked over a tray of empty coffee cups with a loud, shattering crash. "The deal is completely off. I am taking Leo right now. You are not keeping him." I did not flinch. I did not move a single inch backward. I kept my arm firmly wrapped around my terrified grandson, shielding him completely from her unhinged, violent outburst. Megan scrambled wildly over the table, her fingernails scraping aggressively against the brass locks of my briefcase, acting completely out of her mind. She realized her entire life was effectively over, and the sheer suffocating panic drove her into an absolute frenzy. "Tear them up!" she demanded, her voice cracking with pure hysteria as she pounded her fists against the leather. "I will report you for kidnapping. I will tell the police you physically forced me to sign those papers. You will not be telling anyone anything, Megan." A firm, highly authoritative voice rang out over her screaming. The two businessmen sitting at the adjacent table, who had been quietly drinking espresso and reading the morning newspaper for the last hour, simultaneously stood up. They pushed their chairs back aggressively, their suit jackets falling open to reveal heavy tactical belts and shiny gold badges clipped to their waists. They were undercover federal agents coordinated perfectly by Bradley and the local precinct task force for this exact moment. Before Megan could even process their sudden presence, one agent grabbed her flailing arms, pulling her off the table and twisting her wrists expertly behind her back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed over her frantic, desperate screams. "Megan, you are under arrest for felony extortion, severe child endangerment, and federal tax evasion," the agent stated with absolute chilling professionalism. "You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it." I sat quietly in the booth, gently covering Leo's ears to protect him from the noise as the officers dragged his thrashing, screaming mother out the front door of my coffee shop. The trap had flawlessly snapped shut, and the reign of terror she had brought into my family was officially over. 6 months after the dramatic arrest at the Silver Bean coffee shop, the sprawling legal nightmare finally reached its absolute conclusion inside the imposing architecture of the federal courthouse. The grand wood-paneled courtroom felt entirely different from the family court where this vicious battle had truly begun. There were no false tears to be shed here, no manipulative narratives to be spun before a sympathetic magistrate. This was federal territory, a sterile and unforgiving environment where hard, irrefutable evidence dictated the permanent destruction of lives. I sat in the front row of the gallery wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit, my posture perfectly rigid and my expression completely unreadable. Bradley sat directly beside me, a silent sentinel reviewing the final docket. I had left little Leo safely at home with his new highly qualified nanny shielding my grandson entirely from the toxic spectacle of his parents' monumental downfall. The heavy double doors at the front of the room swung open, and the armed bailiff led the defendants into the chamber. The atmosphere instantly shifted, growing heavy with the suffocating weight of impending justice. There was no media circus, only the quiet, lethal efficiency of the justice system preparing to drop the final hammer. The presiding judge, a stern woman with decades of experience dismantling white-collar criminals and fraudsters, took her seat at the elevated bench. She adjusted her glasses, looking down at the two individuals who had foolishly believed they could steal a commercial empire. The time for arrogant schemes and fake tears had officially expired. Megan stood before the judge, a terrifyingly accurate portrait of complete and utter ruin. She was no longer draped in expensive cashmere or flashing luxury designer accessories. She wore a standard-issue, shapeless orange prison jumpsuit, her blonde hair dull and tied back in a harsh, lifeless braid. Her pale skin was deeply splotched, her eyes sunken and hollowed out by months of sitting in a sterile holding cell, unable to post her revoked bail. The judge looked down at the massive stack of prosecutorial evidence detailing her extensive malicious crime spree. The federal prosecutor had been absolutely merciless during the hearings, laying out the precise timeline of her $80,000 identity theft, her sophisticated tax evasion schemes, her felony forgery of my last will and testament, and the final unforgivable act of holding her own child hostage for $1 million ransom. The judge did not hold back her absolute disgust. Megan, the judge, stated, her voice booming through the cavernous courtroom with lethal precision. "You have demonstrated a level of calculated greed and sociopathic manipulation that is frankly staggering. You weaponized the family court system, you actively defrauded federal institutions, and you actively traumatized your own 4-year-old son to secure a massive financial payout you did not earn. You treated the people around you as disposable commodities to fund your vanity. For the combined charges of federal tax evasion, felony extortion, child endangerment, and forgery, I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole." Megan physically collapsed against the defense table, letting out a sharp, breathless gasp as if she had been shot. Her legs gave out completely, and her public defender had to firmly grab her arm to keep her from hitting the floor. She sobbed hysterically, the crushing reality of spending the remainder of her youth locked inside a concrete cell, finally obliterating her arrogant delusions. There would be no more luxury vacations, no country club brunches, no elite status to hide behind. Just 8 years of brutal, unforgiving confinement. Then the judge's piercing gaze shifted directly to Devin. My son stood trembling before the bench, and the transformation in his appearance was profoundly humiliating. Stripped of his high-paying corporate job, his luxury vehicles, and his sprawling suburban estate, Devon looked like a hollowed-out shell of a man. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit he had likely purchased from a discount rack, the cheap fabric bunching awkwardly at his shoulders. His designer shoes had been replaced by scuffed loafers. He kept his head bowed, thoroughly crushed by the public shame of his absolute, undeniable failure. Devon, the judge, continued, her tone shifting from sharp disgust to profound disappointment. You were blessed with a father who provided you with every conceivable advantage. Instead of honoring that massive sacrifice, you allowed yourself to be entirely corrupted by status and greed. You actively conspired to chemically sedate and institutionalize the man who gave you life. However, the court recognizes that you were heavily manipulated into the forgery by your spouse, that you did not participate in the sickening extortion involving your son, and that you have already suffered catastrophic financial and professional ruin. The state has agreed to a strict plea arrangement. I sentence you to 5 years of supervised probation and 2,000 hours of mandatory intensive community service. One single violation, one missed meeting with your probation officer, and you will immediately serve a 5-year prison sentence. You are a profound disgrace to the concept of family. Devon squeezed his eyes shut, hot tears of profound humiliation leaking down his face as the gavel struck the sounding block with a loud, definitive crack. The courtroom slowly emptied, the heavy atmosphere dissipating as the bailiffs escorted Megan back into custody to begin her long 8-year sentence. She did not even look back at Devon as they hauled her roughly through the side doors. I stood up smoothly, adjusting my suit jacket, and walked out into the expansive, marble-lined lobby of the federal courthouse with Bradley walking steadily by my side. The echoing sound of my leather dress shoes against the polished floor signaled the absolute end of this dark, twisted chapter. We were heading straight for the revolving glass exit doors when a desperate, frantic voice called out, echoing through the cavernous public lobby. "Dad, please wait." I stopped, turning slowly to see Devon sprinting awkwardly across the marble floor. He looked completely unhinged, his cheap suit jacket flapping open, his face red and violently streaked with fresh tears. Before Bradley could even step forward to intercept him, Devon threw himself violently forward. He physically collapsed, dropping heavily to both knees right in the middle of the crowded public lobby. Several lawyers, clerks, and armed security guards stopped dead in their tracks, staring in absolute shock at the pathetic spectacle of a grown man sobbing on the floor. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry," Devon cried out, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of any remaining pride or dignity. He clasped his hands together, staring up at me with wide, desperate, bloodshot eyes. "I lost my mind. I let her completely poison me against you. I know I destroyed everything, but please, I am begging you. Let me see Leo. Let me be a father to him. I have absolutely nothing left in this world. I am living in a miserable halfway house on the south side. I am scrubbing graffiti off highway overpasses for my community service. I am completely ruined. Please give me one single chance to make this right. I will do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. Just do not leave me like this." I looked down at the pathetic man kneeling on the cold marble floor. I actively searched my heart for any lingering trace of paternal warmth, any small spark of mercy for the boy I had sacrificed decades of my life to raise and protect. There was absolutely nothing. The well of my compassion had run completely dry. My dark eyes locked onto his, conveying an icy, impenetrable void that made him physically flinch under my gaze. "You made your definitive choice the night you shoved me into a Category 3 blizzard," I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of any human sympathy. "You looked me right in the eye. You called me a useless burden, and you locked the door. You traded your morality for the toxic approval of a racist, greedy woman who ultimately threw you to the wolves the second it benefited her own survival. You are not a victim, Devon. You are simply experiencing the brutal, inescapable consequences of your own vicious actions. I am Leo's sole legal guardian now. You will never set foot near my grandson again." I turned my back on him and walked out the heavy glass doors into the bright, freezing Chicago afternoon, leaving him sobbing uncontrollably on the floor. The freezing Chicago wind hit my face like a physical blow as I stepped out onto the wide concrete steps of the federal courthouse. Bradley walked silently beside me, giving me the space I needed to process the monumental weight of the morning. I could still hear the muffled, pathetic echoes of Devon crying through the heavy glass doors behind us, but I did not stop my pace. I did not turn around to offer him a final glance of pity. For 40 years, my absolute instinct as a father had been to rush back to pick him up when he scraped his knee, to silently pay off his mistakes, to shield him from the harsh, unforgiving realities of the world. But that specific instinct had been surgically removed from my soul. Standing on that cold marble floor, Devon had desperately expected the old Hollis to magically return. He wanted the tired, compliant warehouse worker who would sacrifice his absolute last dollar to buy his son a tailored suit. He wanted the man who would willingly absorb the pain so his child would not have to suffer. But I refused to be his shock absorber any longer. Bailing him out now, offering him even a shred of comfort, would only teach him that tears were a valid currency to buy his way out of catastrophic consequences. I reached the waiting black town car. As the driver opened the heavy door, I looked at Bradley. "Draw up the permanent